Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something, well, almost all of us use nearly every day: caffeine.
That morning coffee, the afternoon tea.
Exactly. Energy drinks, sodas, we grab it to wake up, cut through that fog, help us focus. Seems pretty simple, doesn't it? A quick pick-me-up.
Uh-huh.
But how does this little molecule actually do all that inside our bodies? It feels simple, but when you look closer at the molecular level, it's incredibly complex.
It really is. The effects we feel, they're the end result of this really fascinating, quite intricate dance with our own biology. That's what the sources you brought us dig into.
Precisely. And that's our mission for this deep dive. Using your source material as our guide, we're going on a bit of a journey deep into the body's molecular world to see exactly what happens when caffeine shows up. We want to, uncover those hidden steps behind the feelings we know so well.
And understanding this stuff isn't just like trivia. Getting into these details helps explain why caffeine works like it does, why you might react completely differently to it than your friend,
Right.
and what your body is actually doing under the surface, especially if you're drinking it regularly.
Okay, let's dive in then. Where does this whole process start? How does caffeine even get into our system and start moving around?
Okay, so it begins with absorption, and caffeine is remarkably good at this. The sources say about 99% gets absorbed pretty
How
fast.
fast are we talking?
Within about 45 minutes, mostly from your gut, you'll see the levels in your blood plasma peak somewhere between, say, 15 minutes and maybe up to 2 hours after you drink it.
And does food slow that down?
Yeah, having food in your stomach can slow the absorption rate a bit. Makes sense, right? More stuff to get through.
Okay. And once it's absorbed, where does it go? I read it's lipophilic. Sounds technical.
Yeah, it just means it likes fats or oils.
Yeah.
And that's really important because cell membranes, including the crucial blood-brain barrier.
Ah, the gatekeeper to the brain.
Exactly. Those membranes have fatty layers. So because caffeine is lipophilic, it can slip across these barriers pretty easily. Gets right into the brain, which is key for its effects, but also spreads out widely into breast milk, saliva, even semen, according to the sources. It really gets around.
Okay, so it's everywhere.
Yeah.
How long does it hang out? What's the typical lifespan in the body?
Well, we talk about half-life. That's the time it takes for your body to get rid of half of the amount you consume.
Right.
For most healthy adults, the average half-life is somewhere in the range of 3 to 5 hours.
3 to 5 hours, average. But you mentioned before that experiences vary a lot. Does that mean this half-life isn't fixed?
Not at all. And this is super interesting, a key point from the research. That 3 to 5 hour figure, it's just a ballpark average. Your personal half-life could be, I don't know, maybe 2 hours, maybe 10 hours, sometimes even longer.
Wow, that's a huge range. What causes such big differences?
So many things. Your age matters, your body weight. If you're pregnant, pregnancy significantly slows down caffeine metabolism, extends that half-life quite a bit. Certain medications can interfere with it. The health of your liver is critical.
And I saw something wild in the sources. Being a heavy smoker can actually cut the half-life in half, speed it up.
Yeah, it really speeds up the enzyme that processes it. Seems backwards, but it shows how different factors tweak your individual response.
Okay, speaking of processing, the liver, that's the main player.
Absolutely. The liver does the vast majority of the work, handling something like 99% of the caffeine metabolism.
And is there one specific tool it uses? An enzyme.
There is. The main one, the star player here, is an enzyme called cytochrome P450 isoform 1A2. We usually just call it CYP1A2.
CYP1A2. Okay. And what does it do to the caffeine?
Its main job with caffeine is something called 3-demethylation. It's basically a chemical modification. It tweaks the caffeine molecule.
All right, so the liver's CYP1A2 enzyme breaks down caffeine, but what's left over? Is it just waste?
No, and this is really important. The breakdown process creates 3 main metabolites. And these aren't just inactive leftovers. They are biologically active compounds themselves. They actually contribute to the overall effects you feel.
Active metabolites. Okay, what are they?
The biggest one by far is paraxanthine. Makes up maybe 80 to 84% of the breakdown products. The sources say it's involved in breaking down fats, raises certain things in your blood.
And it acts like caffeine itself.
Pretty much, yeah. It has biological activity very similar to the original caffeine molecule.
Interesting. Okay, what are the other two?
Then you got theobromine, about 12%. You might know that one from chocolate.
Oh, yeah, right.
It's known to widen blood vessels, that's vasodilation, and it's also a mild diuretic, makes you need to pee more.
Mm.
And like paraxanthine, it also has similar biological activity to caffeine.
Okay, and the last one?
That's theophylline, only about 4 to 7%. This one's actually used medically sometimes. It relaxes airway muscles, so it can be used to treat asthma. And yes, it's also biologically active, like caffeine and the others.
So caffeine gets turned into these three other active substances. Why is knowing about them so important? Does it change how we feel the effects?
It really does, mostly because of their half-lives. The sources point out that theophylline and theobromine, those last two, they stick around in your body significantly longer than the original caffeine or paraxanthine.
Ah, so even after the initial caffeine is gone, these guys are still active.
Exactly, their influence continues. So the total buzz or effect you feel can be extended by these lingering metabolites. If a study only measures caffeine levels, it might actually underestimate how long the total pharmacological effect lasts, because these active byproducts are still doing things.
That makes a lot of sense. The feeling might change over time, but it's still active. And eventually, these metabolites get cleared out too.
Yep. They get broken down further into secondary metabolites, and most of that leaves the body through urine. A tiny bit of the original unchanged caffeine, maybe 0.5 to 4%, also gets excreted directly.
Okay. Now, going back to that CYP1A2 enzyme and the huge variation in half-life, how much does the speed of that enzyme vary between people?
Massively. The activity level of CYP1A2 can differ by like 5-fold, maybe even 15-fold between individuals.
Whoa. What causes that?
Mostly genetics. There's a specific common genetic variation. It's called the RS762551 SMP. It doesn't matter the name in the gene for CYP1A2. And this difference basically sorts people into fast metabolizers and slow metabolizers of caffeine.
Fast and slow metabolizers. Okay, this sounds really relevant to, your personal experience listening right now. If you're a slow metabolizer, what does that actually mean after you drink coffee?
It means that a standard amount of caffeine, like from 1 cup of coffee, will stay in your system longer
Yeah.
and reach higher concentrations compared to a fast metabolizer.
Ah, so that's why one person might feel super jittery, anxious, maybe can't sleep for hours after just 1 cup,
Exactly.
while someone else drinks the same amount and then feels, well, maybe just a mild lift.
Precisely. Your genes are effectively changing the dose your body experiences over time, even with the same drink. If you're a slow metabolizer, that caffeine hangs around at higher levels for longer. Understanding this genetic difference is key to why caffeine feels so different from person to person.
Okay, so caffeine gets in fast, gets processed by the liver via CYP1A2 into active metabolites that linger, and how fast that happens depends a lot on your genes. Got
Yep.
it. So that's the journey. But once it's there, floating around, what's the main thing it actually does at the molecular level to wake us up?
Okay, the primary mechanism, at least at the kind of doses most people consume, is blocking receptors for a natural molecule in your body called adenosine.
Adenosine, right. What's adenosine's normal job?
Think of adenosine as like your body's natural sleepiness signal. There's a neuromodulator.
What?
As your day goes on, doing stuff, being awake, adenosine levels gradually build up in your brain. When adenosine binds to its specific receptors on nerve cells, it generally slows down their activity. It promotes relaxation, makes you feel tired, reduces the release of other stimulating chemicals. It's basically the body hitting the brakes, signaling it's time to wind down.
The brake pedal for the brain, kind of.
That's a good way to put it. It's the chemical signal for fatigue.
And caffeine messes with this. How?
Caffeine is basically a molecular mimic. Its 3D shape is incredibly similar to adenosine's shape.
So it fits into the same lock.
Exactly. Because it looks so similar, caffeine can actually bind to the very same receptors that adenosine normally binds to.
But does it activate them like adenosine does? Does it make you sleepy?
No. And that's the key. It binds to the receptor, but it doesn't activate it. It just sits there, occupying the space.
Blocking.
Right. It's called a non-selective competitive antagonist. Non-selective because it can block several types of adenosine receptors. A1, A2A are the main ones we focus on. Competitive antagonist means it competes with adenosine for that parking spot on the receptor, and by binding there, it prevents adenosine from binding and doing its job, which is applying the brakes.
So caffeine is like putting chocks under the wheels, stopping the brakes from being applied. What happens then when you take the brakes off the brain's activity?
You get the opposite effect. Instead of slowing down, neural activity generally increases. By blocking adenosine's inhibitory signal, caffeine leads to more overall firing of neurons. It removes the sleepy signal.
And does that increase brain activity then trigger other things in the body?
It sure does. This heightened neuronal activity is sensed by the pituitary gland in the brain. It thinks, whoa, something's going on, and sends signals that eventually tell the adrenal glands.
The ones on top of the kidneys.
Yep. Tells them to release adrenaline, also known as epinephrine.
Ah, the fight or flight hormone.
Exactly. So that classic caffeine rush,
Mhm.
the alertness, the readiness, maybe even the jitters, a part of that comes from this downstream adrenaline release, which was triggered initially by caffeine blocking adenosine and letting the brain run a bit faster. So it's less about caffeine directly stimulating everything and more about it removing a natural calming influence.
Okay, removing the adenosine brake boosts overall activity, triggers adrenaline. Does it also directly play with other important brain chemicals, neurotransmitters?
Oh, absolutely. Taking the adenosine brakes off has knock-on effects. It indirectly leads to increased release and activity of several stimulating neurotransmitters.
Like dopamine. I know that one's involved in reward, pleasure, movement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Caffeine boosts dopamine activity, especially in brain areas like the nucleus accumbens shell, which is heavily linked to reward and motivation. See, adenosine normally keeps dopamine in check. It inhibits dopamine release through A1 receptors and kind of dampens dopamine signaling through A2A receptors.
So caffeine blocking those receptors lets dopamine run more freely.
Precisely. It facilitates dopamine's effects. That contributes to the buzz, the rewarding feeling, and maybe even some of the effects on movement or focus.
What about norepinephrine? That's the alertness one, right? Concentration.
Yep, also known as noradrenaline. Caffeine helps kickstart the neurons that release norepinephrine, contributing significantly to that feeling of vigilance, focus, and alertness.
Acetylcholine, important for learning, memory.
Caffeine enhances its release too, another stimulating effect.
And glutamate. I know that's a major go signal in the brain, an excitatory neurotransmitter.
That's right. Caffeine increases glutamate levels as well, particularly in that same reward area, the nucleus accumbens. Again, adenosine normally puts a brake on glutamate release via A1 receptors, so blocking A1 lets glutamate levels rise. The A2A receptor block also influences glutamate signaling.
Okay, so it's like a cascade. Caffeine blocks adenosine, that removes the brakes, which leads to more overall brain activity, and that allows stimulating neurotransmitters like dopamine, norepinephrine, acetylcholine, and glutamate to increase their activity. Is that the main story?
That's the core pathway, yes. It explains a lot of the classic effects. But the sources go even deeper into some really specific interactions that are quite fascinating.
Ah, okay. I saw something about a specific kind of partnership, like a dance, between adenosine receptors and dopamine receptors.
Yes. This is where it gets really intricate. Some of caffeine's effects seem to involve a special complex formed when an adenosine A2A receptor pairs up with a dopamine D2 receptor. They form what's called a heteromer.
A heteromer. Okay,
Yeah.
and where does this happen?
These A2AR-D2R heteromers are particularly important in a brain region called the striatum. That area is critical for controlling movement, habits, and it's famously affected in Parkinson's disease.
So within this specific A2AD2 receptor pair in the striatum, what does adenosine normally do?
Normally, when adenosine binds to its A2A receptor part of this complex, it actually makes it harder for dopamine to bind to and activate its D2 receptor partner. It kind of dampens the dopamine signal specifically within that paired unit.
Like turning down the volume on dopamine, but only in this specific connection.
That's a great analogy. It puts a subtle brake specifically on that D2 receptor's response to dopamine.
Okay, so then caffeine comes along, blocks the A2A receptor in that pair.
And by doing that, it prevents adenosine from applying that brake.
Hmm.
It stops adenosine from dampening the D2 signal. So, indirectly, caffeine enhances dopamine signaling through the D2 receptor, specifically within this complex in the striatum.
Wow, that's incredibly specific. Why is understanding this particular interaction important? What does it tell us?
Well, it helps explain some of caffeine's effects on motor control, reaction time, that kind of thing. But maybe more intriguingly, it points towards a potential link with neuroprotection.
Neuroprotection, how so?
Research, especially in animal models of Parkinson's disease, has shown that blocking these A2A receptors, which caffeine does, seems to reduce the toxicity or damage to the dopamine neurons in the striatum.
Right.
Yeah. This potential protective effect seems linked to disrupting that adenosine-dopamine interaction within the heteromer. It might interrupt a chain reaction that could otherwise harm those crucial dopamine cells.
Yeah.
So it shifts our view from caffeine just being a general blocker to being a precise modulator within a really critical brain circuit.
That's quite something. A potential protective effect from your morning coffee linked to this tiny molecular dance. Okay, so that's the main job at normal doses, blocking adenosine, influencing neurotransmitters, maybe even this specific heteromer thing. But the sources were clear. If you consume a huge amount of caffeine, other things start happening, right? The effects change.
They absolutely do.
Yeah.
At much higher concentrations, the kind you wouldn't typically get from, say, a couple of cups of coffee, caffeine starts hitting other targets in your cells. The effects become qualitatively different, maybe less focus, more jitters, anxiety, that kind of thing.
Right. What are some of these secondary targets? I saw something about PDEs.
Yeah, phosphodiesterases. These are enzymes that normally break down an important signaling molecule inside cells called cyclic AMP or a CANMP.
Okay, so PDEs break down CANMP. What does caffeine do?
At high concentrations, caffeine inhibits these PDE enzymes. If you inhibit the thing that breaks down CANMP, then CMP levels inside the cell go up.
And more CAMI does what?
Higher CAMP can influence lots of things, fat breakdown, glycogen breakdown, neurotransmitter release. But PDT, and this is a big, but the sources emphasize this really only happens at significant and high caffeine concentrations. We're talking levels you might reach after consuming something like 2,000 milligrams of caffeine, which is, a lot, way beyond typical daily intake for most people.
Okay, so PDE inhibition is a high-dose effect, not really relevant for a normal coffee drinker. What else happens at high doses? Calcium.
Yes. Very high doses of caffeine can trigger the release of calcium ions from storage compartments inside cells, like the endoplasmic reticulum. It does this by interacting with something called ryanodine receptors.
And calcium release is important for?
All sorts of things, muscle contraction, nerve signaling, crucially the release of neurotransmitters, can also affect heart function. But again, this generally requires pretty high concentrations, much higher than you'd usually see.
And then there was GABA. GABA's the main calm-down neurotransmitter, right? Inhibitory.
That's right. And at concentrations that are, again, likely beyond typical human consumption, caffeine can actually act as an antagonist at GABA receptors, specifically the GABA type.
So it blocks the calm-down signal.
Essentially, yes. Suppressing the brain's main inhibitory system would definitely contribute to feelings of restlessness, agitation, anxiety that can come with excessive caffeine intake. The exact way it does this is complex, possibly linked to that calcium release we just mentioned.
Okay. And one more surprising one, serotonin. The mood molecule, sometimes linked to drowsiness. How does caffeine fit in there?
Yeah, the serotonin connection is complex and maybe a bit counterintuitive. Some sources suggest coffee consumption might increase serotonin levels, possibly by slowing its breakdown. Apparently, even how the beans are roasted can play a role here.
Ah.
And very high caffeine doses might even boost serotonin production.
But wait, if serotonin can make you drowsy, why would caffeine, the ultimate wake-up drug, increase it?
It's a bit of a paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really highlights that caffeine isn't just doing one simple thing. It could be some kind of complex modulation, maybe affecting mood in ways we don't fully grasp, or perhaps it's even a compensatory effect by the body. Interestingly, with chronic caffeine use, the body can actually increase the number and sensitivity of serotonin receptors.
Ah, another adaptation.
Exactly. So this whole interplay with serotonin adds another layer, potentially influencing mood, maybe even dependence and withdrawal symptoms.
That's a perfect transition. Let's talk about that chronic use. What happens when caffeine isn't just a one-off, but a daily habit? Does the body just stay the same?
Oh, definitely not. Your body is constantly trying to maintain balance, homeostasis. So when it's chronically exposed to caffeine, it makes significant adjustments at the molecular and cellular level to try and counteract caffeine's constant effects.
And the main adjustment relates back to that primary mechanism, the adenosine receptors.
Yes, that's the key adaptation. Because caffeine is always there, blocking adenosine receptors, the body responds by basically saying, well, if my brakes are always being blocked, I need more brakes. It increases the number of adenosine receptors, especially the A1 type.
It builds more receptors.
Exactly. Studies in animals show increases of maybe 15–20% more A1 receptors. The receptors might also become more sensitive to the adenosine that is around. This whole process is called upregulation or sensitization.
And this is why people develop tolerance, why you need more coffee over time to get the same effect.
Precisely. If you have more adenosine receptors, that initial cup of coffee isn't blocking enough of them to give you the same boost as before. You need more caffeine to block the now increased number of receptor sites to achieve the same level of stimulation. That's tolerance explained at the molecular level.
Okay, so tolerance is having more adenosine brake pedals. What happens then if you suddenly stop the caffeine after your body has built all these extra receptors?
That's withdrawal. When the caffeine disappears, all those extra, possibly more sensitive adenosine receptors are suddenly wide open. Now, your normal baseline level of adenosine, which is always there, can bind to this much larger number of available receptors.
So the normal amount of adenosine suddenly has a much bigger effect.
Exactly. The braking signal becomes much stronger than usual because there are more receptors to receive it. That exaggerated inhibition contributes heavily to the classic withdrawal symptoms, the fatigue, the headache, the difficulty concentrating. Your system is temporarily out of balance in the other direction.
Makes total sense. Are the adaptations only in the adenosine system, or does chronic use change other things too?
It's pretty widespread. The body adjusts elsewhere too. For example, beta-adrenergic receptors, the ones that respond to adrenaline or norepinephrine, often get downregulated, maybe about 25% fewer. Perhaps that's the body trying to compensate for the increased norepinephrine activity caused by caffeine.
Okay, so fewer adrenaline receptors. What about others?
Interestingly, receptors for serotonin, acetylcholine, muscarinic and nicotinic types, and even GABA receptors tend to be upregulated, increased in number. GABA sites might increase by as much as 65%.
Wow, so lots of systems are recalibrating. What about dopamine receptors? Does chronic caffeine give you more of those?
Apparently not, according to the sources. Dopamine receptor density, both D1 and D2 types, seems relatively unchanged with chronic caffeine use. This really supports the idea we discussed earlier that caffeine's main impact on dopamine is more about influencing its release and how effective its signal is, perhaps through things like that A2AR, D2R heteromer interaction, rather than just changing the number of receptors.
Fascinating. And there was one last intriguing point about brain preconditioning. What's that about?
Yeah, that's a more speculative but interesting idea from some research. The thought is that chronic low-level caffeine exposure might kind of train the brain, potentially enhancing its metabolic efficiency or making neurons slightly more resilient to stress or harmful events down the line. It's like preparing the brain for challenges. Still an area needing more research, but a potentially positive long-term adaptation.
Okay, wow. What a journey. Let's try and pull this all together. We started with caffeine getting absorbed incredibly fast,
Right. Then processed by that key liver enzyme, CYP1A2.
which breaks it down into active metabolites like paraxanthine, theobromine, and theophylline. And those metabolites can actually stick around longer than the caffeine itself.
Uh-huh. Then we
Yeah.
saw the main event.
Yeah.
Caffeine blocking adenosine receptors, essentially taking the natural brakes off brain activity.
Which leads to more neurons firing and indirectly ramps up stimulating neurotransmitters, dopamine or epinephrine, acetylcholine, glutamate, making us feel alert and focused.
We even dove into that super specific A2AR, D2R heteromer interaction in this striatum, potentially linking caffeine to movement control and maybe even neuroprotection.
Then we looked at what happens at high doses. Caffeine starts hitting other targets like PDEs, calcium channels, GABA receptors, even serotonin pathways, explaining why too much can feel unpleasant.
And finally, we saw how chronic use changes everything. The body adapts by building more adenosine receptors, which is the root cause of tolerance and withdrawal. Plus, adjustments happen in other systems too.
And putting all this molecular detail together really helps make sense of your own experience with caffeine, doesn't it? It explains why your genes might make you a fast or slow metabolizer, feeling it strongly or hardly at all.
Yeah, why it feels like lifting a fog rather than just pure artificial stimulation, because it's removing an inhibitor.
Why too much gives you the jitters, those secondary mechanisms kicking in, and why stopping suddenly can be rough because your brain's balance is temporarily shifted with all those extra adenosine receptors.
Exactly. So considering this incredibly complex web, caffeine hitting multiple neurotransmitter systems, the effects changing with dose, the huge individual differences from genetics and adaptation, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the true long-term consequences of using this powerful molecule daily, maybe effects we aren't fully aware of yet?
And looking ahead, could we use this deep molecular knowledge to create truly personalized caffeine advice? Recommendations based not just on preference, but on our actual individual genetic makeup and how our bodies handle it.
That's the fascinating question, isn't it?
Definitely something to think about over your next cup.